So let's just give a round of applause to Jason. May not be as good as it's been set up today, so hold your applause. And if it's not, it really is not that good. You can tweet at me. Just
Did you get on Twitter in 2002?
No, it's Yahoo user group name. I was in the early days.
he was so Twitter. He was before Twitter.
Yeah, he was Yahoo user group.
So let's take a seat.
Yeah, sure.
A seat in the hot seat, as I call it. I'm assuming everyone can hear us okay. Maybe shall I raise volume? No, okay. So where should we begin? Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're up to, where you've been, maybe one interesting thing that we wouldn't necessarily know about you.
Sure. Well, I run sales and marketing for a sort of small, about a $20 million technology and services company, focused almost exclusively on helping large enterprise clients understand, anticipate, and manage the buyer journey. And it really sort of was born out of the change in that buyer journey that's taken place across the last 5, 7, 10 years that everyone in the room here has sort of felt in the context of whether they're a sort of a marketer or a salesperson. It's just interesting, who here is in sales? Okay. And then,
I am part of it. It is salespeople in the audience.
yeah, no, but it was interesting because I was hearing, and maybe it's just the topic, in sort of networking with a few people, that there are some people here who are marketers. So can you guys raise your hands? Maybe at least a couple in here, so some folks. So I can't say too many bad things about you guys, right? No, just kidding. But yeah, so MarketBridge is really focused on the customer buying journey and helping marketers and salespeople that are aligned to it to drive better results. My background, I came from a local company called CEB, and I spent about 10 years there in their sales and marketing practice.
Corporate Executive Board.
Corporate Executive Board, yeah, rebranded CEB. And we spent a lot of time doing research on this phenomena of how customers are changing how they buy, how more of their decision process was going online into new channels, how sales was being kind of cut out of more of the process. It used to be that when a customer had a question, they called their salesperson, and obviously those days are long behind us. When a customer has a question, they go online and they self-educate, they do research, and they go into peer groups. And they form a decision, and then they interact with their own internal stakeholders, and then they call the sales firm, and they're asked to quote a price. And we were really kind of doing research on it, and then I came across MarketBridge, who was really trying to help organizations adapt and align and change by better leveraging technology and data to do so, which is part of the reason I moved over to MarketBridge, and I'm there now. I've been there for about 3 years. Interesting tidbit, I spent a year, I graduated from college. I started a little business doing gourmet all natural dog treats out of Ottawa, Canada, which is where I'm from. And I signed a big contract, my first big deal, to kind of the equivalent of Giant in Canada. And then I realized that I didn't want to make dog treats for the rest of my life. So I actually sold the contract to a competitor, and then I bought a 1971 VW van, and I drove to Mexico and lived there for a year in a van. So I have lived in a van down by the river. So that's my interesting, and I made it back all right. So here I am now.
You survived.
I did survive, yeah.
So you obviously talk about this idea of sales and marketing tend to get along, or it's said that they don't tend to get along, but what specifically for you really got you interested? You kind of touched on it with some of the work you're doing in CEB and approach to MarketBridge, but what specifically gets you really fascinated and passionate about the topic?
I think it's a couple things. One, it's reorienting companies to think about the customer first, right? So a lot of organizations have built up, especially with large companies, have built up a lot of infrastructure and a lot of capability around a sales function and a marketing function. And in a world where you did big brand advertising and you were pumping stuff in through the television airways and putting stuff on billboards, that worked because people saw it and they called up their sales rep. In today's world, obviously, it's changed quite a bit. So what gets me excited is really trying to understand that change in how customers are buying and then really looking at kind of innovative ways in which companies are adapting to that, whether it be through digital engagement, whether it be through social, whether it be through better data and better analytics on their customers, and then helping other organizations figure that out and chart that path and actually get to a better place as a business, which is making their customers happy, but is also making them money. So.
And it seems, correct me if I'm wrong, but it just seems like this topic is really top of mind right now. Like every topic kind of has their time in the sun. But I'd say last year was all about SDRs. This year I'm seeing a lot more interest around alignment around marketing and sales. What do you think is the root cause of that? What's causing this massive interest? Is it really about that customer journey?
I think it's organizations starting to feel much more pain around having to adapt to that journey. So if you look at some of CV's recent research, which says the sales cycle, the average sales cycle today is 2 times longer and is twice as likely to end in a loss. Okay, so if you think about that and how it plays out for your average seller, that's a heck of a lot more work to get not a lot more output, right? And that's hard. And organizations are feeling that pain because they're putting more and more resource into what they would traditionally, what they've traditionally had success with, and they're not getting the outcome from that. And then they're looking at things like marketing, who before used to be all about big brand, big idea, big creative. And I was talking to actually Angie earlier, and she was talking about how marketers, they came into being marketers because they didn't want to have to work with numbers. They didn't want to have to work in technology. And the game's changed so dramatically over the last little while, and now they're finding that they have to be there, and it's all very visible and transparent. So you've got this pain on the side of salespeople in terms of how do we actually convert deals, how do we close business, and then there's visibility into marketing now, which hasn't existed as much in the past. And those two things together create a lot of tension, let alone all the other things that marketing and sales need to be doing well together. So that's one big thing. And then I think there's another phenomenon, which is the lines are blurred between where marketing ends and where sales starts. And a lot of that's because of the circular nature of how customers buy today. So it's not a process anymore. It's customers engaging with you through your web, engaging with a salesperson, going back to online resources, learning more. And all of a sudden, the need for these two organizations to be aligned, to tell a similar story as it relates to specific types of customers, and even based on the fact that they've been trained to engage as consumers, personalization at the individual customer level through marketing. And all of this is creating a lot more need to get these two organizations to work well together, to be aligned, and a lot more pain when they're not doing that effectively.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting how marketing is, in many ways, been so rapidly changing, going away from just pure branding or events-driven marketing to being very, very data-driven, and how that's kind of now impacting what's going on in sales. But I think what's really interesting is, what do you see as kind of the markers of organizations that, we'll talk about like what organizations get right, but what about organizations that aren't doing it well, where sales and marketing really are their throats? What does that look like?
I mean, I think there's a few markers. So one of them is into the pain point I was talking about earlier, just consistently decreasing conversion rate on marketing opportunity past to sales or sales opportunity in general. Either because we're not aligned as an organization to how the information the customers need, or we're not actually doing it in a way that allows us to win over competitors. And I think you see a lot of organizations struggling with that. Their close rates on deals that they're running at and opportunities for marketing are kind of falling off a cliff. So I think that's one big marker. The other big marker for me in organizations that are misaligned is, and we see this a lot, is an inability to actually measure the effectiveness of marketing. Because it's one thing to know it's not working in general, but given that the average CEO today really understands that there are tools and data and analytics available that help you figure out how your marketing is doing, the lack of that in an organization is a marker, because if you can't actually measure it, you can't actually understand how to fix it. And a lot of organizations are struggling with that because they haven't, again, brought up in this idea of using analytics and data to do that effectively.
Yeah, I think it comes out of a lot of the dawn of industrial marketing, which came out of a lot of B2B organizations back in the 60s and 70s, manufacturing widgets. And you were more focused on brand, more focused on advertising, the rise of advertising. So it wasn't really a focus on numbers, because those numbers can exist.
Yeah.
It's just a different world today.
It's interesting, and there's also misalignment in terms of how marketing communicates with sales. So I was sitting in a working session at a conference about 2 years ago, and it was a marketing and sales conference all around alignment. And sorry to the marketers in the room, but there were more marketers there than salespeople, because salespeople are in the field trying to close deals. Marketers have more time generally to be at things like conferences and learning, which is all good. But I'm sitting in this working session. The topic of the working session is something like, how do we get marketing and sales to work better together? And the facilitator was talking about how do you think about working with marketing? And the marketers would say things like, well, I pass all these leads to marketing or to sales, and they're not following up on them. They're not doing anything with them. In this group, there's probably 90% marketers, 10% salespeople. There's one senior salesperson who's sort of sitting, eating his lunch, quiet. And sort of the chatter dies down. And then he says, the problem is no salesperson cares about leads. What salespeople care about is opportunities. And opportunities are actually qualified. Opportunities are actually valuable to chase down. Leads, unqualified leads, are a waste of time, but because marketing and sales haven't gotten together and really defined what a lead pass to sales needs to look like, and a lot of organizations struggle with this, marketers are frustrated because they're creating all of this value, and sales is frustrated because none of it's closing, and you end up with this tension.
It's almost like I was reading in a blog post that basically was titled "Sales Hates Leads." That was literally the blog post title. But it comes back to that point that a lot of stuff that's coming through that funnel, through the entry, it's just random. In many cases, like, okay, well, someone signed up to a webinar or downloaded this.
Yeah.
Maybe what information you put in.
Right.
And you go through it, and eventually, if you're a sales rep, you look at this information and say, well, none of this is my target. I can't sell this. It's too low level, it's this or that. But it's quite interesting, this whole concept of the lead, opportunity, who's owning what. We'll talk a little bit about that later, because obviously now the whole dawn of demand generation, who owns that, comes into play. But one thing that I've also seen is this whole notion of marketing eating sales.
Right.
And if you remember, like the Peter Drucker quote, I think it comes down to something like, the aim of marketing is to make selling superfluous. I'm not hearing you going. Do you agree with that? I hope not. But to the point, it seems that particularly technology companies, there's almost like this desire to eat more and more of the funnel and take more and more ownership of the relationship with the customer. What are you seeing, or kind of what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think superfluous is an interesting word. I think about marketing as making sales more productive. And a big part of why marketing is moving down the funnel is a function of how customers want to buy. And the fact that some of the scaled resources that customers need to engage with, they're accessing through traditional marketing channels as opposed to traditional sales channels. So it's natural that they're moving down the funnel. The key in all this is, in that process, there's so much information on that customer, what they care about, prediction around what they actually want to buy. And if marketing can actually capture that and feed it to sales in an effective way, you can make salespeople far more productive in how they're engaging and far more effective in how they're engaging. So Forrester just put out some recent research that says, and they've revised it from 29% to 10%, 10% of customers say that salespeople come into a conversation with enough context and intelligence to make that conversation valuable. Now, what's that a function? Are salespeople dumber than ever before? No, absolutely not. The customer is smarter, but the interesting thing is the customer is smarter because of all the information that they've consumed from your company, but the salesperson doesn't see that or recognize that or is unable to consume that in an effective way. So if marketing can feed that type of information to sales, sales productivity goes through the roof. They're focused on the right customers at the right time with the right message to drive the sale. And in some cases that's a long sales cycle, in some cases that's a short sales cycle. But if marketing can actually get further down the funnel, what's ultimately makes us all better off because we're able to convert more deals, put more money in our pocket. Now, is that ultimately going to mean that there are less sales jobs in the future? Maybe. But the good salespeople are going to be far more productive than they are today, and that might be a good thing.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it seems as if, I think you read the same stuff around, a million less B2B sales reps in 2020 and all that. But it really comes down to, well, what were some of those sales reps doing in the past? And were they actually adding value in each one of those customer conversations? To your point, one of my biggest pet peeves is just the content and how you're actually using this content that, invariably is created for sales reps. But generally, I feel there's a big disconnect between what marketing is delivering and what salespeople in the field actually need or want in terms of helping them have those valuable conversations. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Have you seen things that kind of help alleviate that gap?
In terms of sort of content.
Yes, the content and making sure it's actually relevant.
Yeah. I mean, I think there are a lot of great tools out there. There's a big piece of the content challenge, which is marketing actually taking sales input on the content that works.
Yeah, imagine that.
Yeah. We often work with clients, and we're working with large sort of multinational, large enterprise clients, but we go in there and they of the content they have, 80% of it is useless and they shouldn't be using it, but the pieces that work are gold. And if you can actually figure out what pieces work and then arm sellers to know when to use them, and there are great tools out there like Seismic and Sabo and other tools like that, which actually map to a buying process and serves content up to sales when it matters. They can be really effective at making the content that works more accessible and arming the salesperson at the right time to be putting the right content in front of customers. There's that piece of it which is important. There's also a big piece of it which is, you still got to be able to deliver the content effectively, and that's where kind of building your capability and how you deliver is important. But at the end of the day, if marketers have their druthers, all they do is build new pieces of content. And more what we're seeing great companies do is take a step back, really evaluate what they have, figure out what's actually working, and then doubling and tripling down on that content with their salespeople, making it much easier for them to get at.
And so we've definitely talked about some more of the troubling or bad practices, but what do you see as kind of worked in terms of bridging the gap between sales and marketing? Obviously, you work with a lot of clients, and you've seen and implemented for clients some of those changes. So, is there a framework that you've used, or some ideas that you've seen really help kind of bring sales leadership and marketing leadership together, as well as having that filter down the rank?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the starting point, right? And we've done some work around relative to performance of large organizations who either have siloed sales and marketing functions or who have aligned sales and marketing functions. And the easiest way for us to think about alignment is they have leaders that own both of those functions. So what we found is, indexed by all the other factors that could matter, an organization that has that alignment is 17%, performs at 17% better level. So that alignment matters.
Having one executive that basically owns both.
Having one executive or more alignment between those functions will pretty dramatically improve performance. So that's a starting point. I think process is a place too that organizations look at, and the simplest way to think about that is actually looking at your marketing and sales funnel, looking at the stages and clearly defining how things are moving through that funnel so that sales knows that when they're going to get something from marketing, it's met a quality bar that they can be comfortable with, and thus are willing to put the energy and effort into running after. So process is a piece that's important. There's obviously the technology piece that everyone's aware of now, but making sure you've got the right technology stack across that in order to be able to get the right information to sales. What's interesting about the technology piece, though, is more often than not, organizations make technology decisions at a point in their funnel as opposed to actually thinking about how it flows through. So they're buying a technology to solve a very specific pain point or a very specific problem without thinking about the implications and the different data that they would get out of that as something is moving through. And then obviously data is a big part of it. So we work with a lot of organizations that are looking at using data and using prediction to help salespeople make better decisions on where to spend their time, what customers to focus on. Again, when you're in front of a customer, where are they in their journey? How can you actually influence that? What content matters? And being more prescriptive with sales so that they have a strong hypothesis going into any conversation they might be having with a client and can deviate from that as necessary. But the playbook, using data and predictive analytics is a place where we see a lot of organizations investing and getting a lot of return.
Is there anything maybe just, maybe some examples of where you've seen that kind of best practice play out, just in terms of using some of these predictive tools, or really just more of a process in place to make sure that that sales reps are really working on the quality opportunities, and that marketing is really delivering on that as a metric?
Well, so quality opportunities, working on quality opportunities for us, one of the big things is actually measuring close rate on marketing leads that are passed, size of the deal on marketing leads that are passed, tracking that very closely, and then tuning your marketing upstream to impact that. And we see a lot of clients in the tech space doing a lot of that.
Sure.
Something as simple as starting with basic lead scoring and actually making that more than just whatever marketing automation pops out, making that actually about your company and about the markers that matter. So for one of our big tech companies, Fortune 10 tech company, they're selling a software product into the security space, and just being able to provide data on what the existing technology is in that customer, which is available and which can be predictive on whether or not they're interested in a certain category. Like that level of data and analytics can be really helpful for a salesperson to say, hey, this is more important or less important. And then driving that into scoring, which can prioritize, can help a lot as well.
Right. I think it gets down to different levels of information that can be provided for the sales rep in motion. So I think first generation was just you'll get your name, address, company, title. Then there was the second level of data, which was a little bit more demographic view.
Yeah, sure.
What are they interested in, or did they do anything kind of social-wise or blog posts, or now also like a third level, adding on top of that second layer of information, something that's a little bit more intelligent, to that point, having the predictive information, looking at broad streams, say, okay, well, these kind of sit in our ICP, and they seem to be in our wheelhouse, things that win at a greater percentage. So that's kind of really interesting.
Yeah, and again, piloting that, proving it, and then bringing the case back to the business, right? So, half of the battle in getting people to change what they do is to bring back examples of where it's working, and that's a big part of how to implement some of this stuff as well.
And it also seems that a lot of this plays into this whole idea of having almost a very well-defined service level agreement between marketing and sales, right?
Yep.
So, what kind of examples of SLAs have you seen between the marketing and sales organization to make sure that both are accountable?
Yeah. Well, the biggest one that we see, and I talked a little bit about earlier, is just definitions around what's a marketing qualified lead and a sales accepted lead, right? So what are the criteria that make that up, and what hurdle do you need to get over in order to say, hey, this is actually qualified and you should run after it? And whether that's, to your point, whether it's firmographic, demographic, plus behavioral data from marketing automation, plus a lot of organizations are now looking at third-party data that's telling them things about buying behavior on other web properties, for example, like pulling all that in to say, hey, for these 3 or 4 or 5 reasons, which are very clearly defined, we think this person or this company is in market. We think this is a good opportunity. We think you should spend time here over anything else. That definition and agreeing on that definition ahead of time is a big part of it.
I'd like to actually open up to questions. So we have, we can talk a little bit about metrics and all that, but what are some of the challenges that maybe some of you are facing out there, or some of the questions you have around working with your marketing organization, and vice versa, working with your sales organization?
Sure. So I had a question about that. You talked about marketing. I mean, it's a very fascinating conversation, first of all.
Yeah.
And it's very challenging always that we personally have to deal with on an everyday basis. Where I believe that my people are not focusing towards the leads that are being generated and not converting them and qualifying them into an opportunity, right? But marketing can only give them so much. Right? But at a certain point of time, a person, a seller, who understands the sales cycle and who can walk them through the funnel and does not let them wander, because marketing lets them wander all over the place. Right?
Sure.
Sales is like a funnel where when they get in, they get in from one side and they get out from the other side. Right? So at some point in time, the salesperson has to handhold them and walk them through until the end.
Right.
But the salesperson fails to identify, recognize, and I guess the better qualified word would be doing the business development at the time, right?
Right.
Rather than selling, and then bringing in the sales. Because seller is more interested in commissions, and they consider that as a waste of time or not too much investment.
Well, I think there's a couple ways that I've seen companies kind of address that. One is sort of specialization. So if you haven't read the book, sort of Predictable Revenue, Aaron Ross, great read. And one of the big things he advocates for is this idea of specialization across the buying process. So if you're handing a lead to a direct seller who's on the road, that lead isn't going to get followed up on unless you have really clear value around why. But if you're handing it to an ISR, inside sales, and they have the right incentives around qualifying it, you can get much further along at a lower cost. So that's a big part. So specialization is one element of it. But for me, the biggest thing that we got to do as we think about aligning marketing to sales is prove to sales, and ultimately that's in their pocketbook, that following up on marketing leads is going to pay them back more than them doing it on their own way. And a lot of that's measurement, a lot of that is bringing back wins to the organization on how it's worked, and it takes time, but that's the biggest part. And to be frank, if those leads aren't paying off for marketing, a lot of organizations are better off in having their sellers out there driving this themselves, right? So until you can actually prove that, it's difficult to get the change.
Actually, in enterprise sales and sales are very complex, right?
Of course, yes.
So, which means that you have to deal with many influencers, right?
Yeah.
And convince them. And when a lead comes in through the marketing, that's generally a lead, then a seller has to work through the system to make it a real opportunity.
They do, and I think most folks have probably seen this as well. CEB's put out some research that says that today, in today's buying environment, in a consensus sale, there's between 5 and 6 stakeholders or influencers involved in a complex sales process on the client side, on the customer side. Meaning you've got a bunch of people that you either need to bring on side or figure out how to manage to get a deal through. So you're right, it's much more complex. What's interesting in that context is marketing is saying, okay, how do I help the seller? So I help the seller by delivering a lead. I help the seller with better content. I help the seller by understanding the buying group. So how can you get better data to understand who are the influencers in this organization? How can I set up sales to not have to go and figure all that on their own, but to get better direction around that? And we're seeing some companies actually put some of that in place and getting a lot of success. So like the idea of marketing, this is one of the things that I really try to coach clients around. The idea that marketing and sales are separated by the moment when the lead is passed, those days are gone. Great marketing organizations are partnered with sales through the buying process, because that buying process can be in front of sales, can be through other properties, and marketing as an enabler of sales is critical to get all this right.
Just one follow-up question about solution sales. Mm-hmm. What is your take on the solution sales side? Right, so there's a term that was used, a lot of times, solution sales, which means that you handhold the customer and build the solution.
Right.
So where would you fit that into the marketing and sales cycles? Where do you think that after marketing has done their job, the time is for the solution sales to kick in and kind of evolve the ideas and the vision of the customer to align with your product or the service? And that would more be sitting in between marketing and sales?
Yeah, it's interesting. So solution sales, I think there's a lot of nomenclature around it. There's a lot of change that's happened recently in terms of how that works. So there are a lot of big complex sales where actually building the solution for the client is a key part of it. And those industries or those sales models aren't going to go away. There's a lot of organizations who have said, hey, instead of a solution sale, putting everything on the back of the seller to do discovery, to build the solution, to run through a stakeholdering process, we're actually going to take a step back and we're actually going to build solutions or products which actually align to the need that we know is in the market, and then engage that way. So solution sales in the context of like discovery and customized solutions, that's a really, really hard game to play right now because you don't get the time you need from your customer to be able to do that effectively, except if you're selling nuclear power plants, you're going to get that time, right? But if you're selling, something that's actually driving a better business outcome in these organizations, a lot of time you got to go in with something that's actually packaged. Marketing can help tremendously in that process, and that's where we're seeing a lot of marketers kind of lean in the context of taking a step back and saying, how can I help sales, as opposed to, man, I'm all about getting to the lead volume number that I need and throwing those over the fence and then going after more leads.
And this one's kind of interesting because we've gone through different cycles, and
Yeah.
now we're kind of in the challenger sales cycle. And
We
so-
may be past it.
And we may be past it. Yeah, true. But interesting enough, we've gone through solution selling going on time. Now it's about trying to front end
Yep.
a lot of those discussions, trying to deliver at the point in time some specific salient value proposition.
What's really interesting though is you saw it, and so the pendulum all swings, right? So you see like the world of solution selling start to move more towards product. And I think clients are starting to, a couple things are happening. One is all of a sudden they're getting 1,000 requests for time from folks who are selling the latest new product. So their ability to actually figure out what they need to be spending time on in terms of interacting with vendors is pretty hard role for them right now. So what we're seeing is organizations actually swing back from kind of pure product sale to somewhere in the middle where you're actually coming in with a hypothesis, you're coming in with a product, but you're actually able to flex around that in order to be able to align better to the need and create value in the sales process, right? And that's a big part of earning trust and ultimately getting business. So figuring out that right middle point between kind of pure solution sales and pure product sales is really important.
Yeah.
But I saw a question over here.
Yeah, so mine's more based on content.
Yeah.
So our company, I always run into, even though we're selling to sales teams, and with the industry that I'm in, marketing always gets involved.
Mhm.
Because it's like a really delicate, like we don't want our SDR sending out content that we're not approving. And it's always this butting of heads, and we're always finding ourselves as liaison, trying to bring them together.
Right.
So how do you coach this delicate balance of, because marketing is very, and I always tell, when I'm talking to salespeople, I'm like, listen, marketing is very one-way communication tool. Like you're sending out content, you're educating your buyers, and sales is very two-way. You're trying to get that conversation going. But when they try to come together, it's always this argument because they want content. So how do you address that delicate balance to get them on the same page, to be able to share ideas and to still keep the role specific, but still keep the content specific while keeping everybody happy?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's definitely, what industry are you in?
So we have a sales automation platform.
Oh, cool. Which one?
Outreach.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I think it's sort of an interesting challenge, and not one that obviously everyone here probably feels that pain to some degree. I think something I said earlier, which is really important in the context of building trust, is making sure that sales has a voice into the content. And a lot of organizations who are doing that really well are actually creating better channels of communication for sales to feedback and for marketing to take that and actually do something different. And that trust can actually go a long way when marketing is saying, hey, the reason that we're putting this content is X, Y, Z, and you've had a say in it. That can be really helpful in terms of improving that relationship. The other thing that I find is pretty helpful is just being really clear with why and being able to actually measure the efficacy of the content in certain situations. So a salesperson is going to have a preconceived view on what's going to work for them and what's worked for them in the past. Just by giving that salesperson visibility into which piece of content worked for what reason on the aggregate, and bringing that data back to make a case as opposed to marketing just saying use this piece because we're asking you to use this piece, can be really effective. So better data on the effectiveness of the content in certain stages of the process can be helpful in creating a case for the salesperson to do too, right? Like, oh yeah, my peers are doing this, it's working for them, I'm going to try it, and everyone kind of wins. And the same for lead score, we find. So a lot of organizations take lead scoring and they just port it into their CRM, and it's a number that pops up on a sales rep's desktop, right? And there's no context around what that score means. And what we find, the organizations who are winning are providing that intelligence and context to the rep in the form of information intelligence that not only legitimizes the score, but also gives the rep better intelligence to use to reach out to that prospect. And so that visibility and transparency into the why we're doing it can go a long way. And there's a lot of cool tools out there that can help with that too.
You literally just gave me a sales pitch. Thank you.
Well,
To my
yeah.
next marketer.
Very good.
Yeah, it's so true to that point. I mean, in so many of these schools I've seen where, what is a 5 versus a 3 in a lead
Right.
score? Like, okay,
79, okay, what do I do with that?
I don't even know where to go. I mean, why?
Right.
I mean, what makes it that number versus another number?
I just wanted to add one comment to this dialogue right here. One of the things that I've seen happen time and again with sales and marketing organizations is that marketing thinks that, sales is really just the channel, and, sales isn't strategic, and, what do the sales guys and gals know? They're just burning through opportunities, what have you. But one of the things that I've found to work really successfully is when a customer actually comes on, or when a prospect becomes a customer to come to your industry, to create the opportunity, whether it's through some type of informal interaction over the phone or even through email. Why did you become a customer? Because what we love to better understand is are the various types of marketing tools and initiatives that we're using, are they actually working? Did you become a customer because you saw early on in the awareness building process something that worked? And because likely the salesperson's already developed a pretty good relationship with the now customer, enable that customer to speak with marketing. That will change marketing's perception immediately about sales, the how strategic sales are, and they'll listen to a customer. This is a paying customer there. They'll listen to a customer almost quicker than they'll listen to a salesperson.
Yeah.
So
It's really interesting to hear you talk
I've
about
always
it.
found that to work because there's just this like mental roadblock in marketers that they're like, it's the sales schlep, and the marketer and the salesperson's like, yeah, and the guy in the ivory tower over there knows nothing about the field. But if you make the customer the enabler of that information, it changes perceptions left, right, and center.
Yeah, well, in companies that I've seen, they've had this tension between sales and marketing, and they start moving into product, and they build a product development team, and all that product development team wants to do is talk to customers and salespeople, right? Because that's the channel for voice of the market, and it's just interesting to see how that can change the culture in some of these organizations. That's where this tension existed, and then marketing says, "Oh, yeah, wow, look at that! We're getting a lot of value out of it."
It's almost like stepping in, the other person's shoes. In many cases.
Yeah, sure.
Like, getting marketers to see what's going on in sales, and vice versa. Well, sales also kind of stepping in and kind of seeing like what is going on from a marketing perspective. I do know that there's some organizations that try to do rotational, to try to get people in both organizations to kind of do a little bit of time in each.
Question?
Well, this is actually all related. I'd like to get Jason's take on not the relationship between sales and marketing per se, but especially in the larger organizations you've been with, or colleagues have been with. What exactly do you see in the end result, the relationship, the actual hands-on activity that comes from corporate, whether it's getting in the way or not getting in the way, whether it's helpful or not? I'm just curious if there's any correlation between corporate's ability to really influence end results in the field.
It depends on the industry, and it depends on the complexity of the sale to some degree. And when you say corporate, there's a lot of benefit in executive partnership with sales in terms of getting deals done. So in the context of that partnership in selling, there can be a lot of benefit. We're seeing a lot more of the power in marketing organizations shift away from corporate and go into the business unit and focus on pipeline generation and away from big brand and other kind of more corporate marketing functions. So as a result, you're getting that effect, which is, and it always shifts back and forth, but the investment that organizations are making at the center is being pushed to the business unit because that's actually where it can have the most impact and drive the best business result. And as a result, be tighter with sales and be tighter with the objectives of the business. So we're seeing some of that shift, but big client of ours, the last 10 years has had that shift back and forth 3 or 4 times. So a little bit of, depending on the times, it can go back and forth, but the move from corporate into the BU and marketing focusing on pipeline generation as opposed to kind of sort of the bigger, fluffier ideas. If that helps, I don't know.
Wanted to comment kind of on the previous 2 questions, so to speak, how they may tie in together. I work for organizations that are very large and have that corporate mindset of marketing where this is the template, this is how we generate leads to the entire organization versus departments, and this is what you're supposed to do from thereafter. And then the organization where it's a much more tailored approach where it's really particular to what that dealer needs in order to communicate the right message and get it done. I guess one thing that may really make both sides work, because as salespeople, we don't really have a lot of control over either way. It's however the organization is choosing to do it. So the individual salesperson is being able to convey your messaging, what is it you need to marketing, which whoever your liaison or contact in marketing is usually helps out a lot. Because to your point, they kind of salespeople as one generic kind of lump, so to speak, and stereotypical in some cases of just kind of the shady car sales guy who just wants to tell us what we need to do. But we were to convey to them that, hey, especially for a new business situation, we don't have a client voice to utilize in order to enable that relationship or that request. In those cases, you may have to just really sit that marketing person down, or at least in some email or some type of conversation, and convey to them, I'm trying to convey this particular message to this customer and why. It's kind of a tedious process to do each time, and those roadblocks, you can get them to understand why some generic email or some generic brochure, or just something that is approved media or collateral may not be enough in this case, especially dealing with large corporate organizations that have a one-size-fits-all type.
Well, it's interesting you talk about that, because the thing that we're hearing more and more of is this concept of personalization, and this concept that, all of us as consumers are used to having, the touch points from products that we're buying. In a lot of cases, because they're digital and because of data, they'll ultimately become more personal, which means marketers need to adapt to that as well. So the generic brochure isn't going to cut it anymore, and the input from sales into that content can be hugely valuable in the context of just that context, right? Context for that customer, context of their business situation. So, a little bit more flexibility goes a long way in an environment where your B2B buyer is increasingly being trained by their consumer activity to expect more personalization, expect it to be more about them. So that partnership becomes really important in that context.
Particularly when you start talking about things like the customer journey,
Yeah,
buyer
sure.
journey, it's all about trying to figure out how you find those connections and how you actually drive all this content you have and make it relevant.
Question over here.
Yeah, I actually have two questions.
Great.
One is, have you seen compensation systems that work, that help align marketing and sales? Why don't you answer that, and then I'll ask you my other one.
Yeah, I've seen it for marketing in terms of downstream conversion. So leads converted to opportunities, converted to revenue, and then paying that back upstream to marketers in more of an incentive structure, like a sales structure, which culturally can be interesting in terms of the shift of the mindset of a marketer, right? But that can be really, really effective. And then, less so in the direct enterprise seller environment, but the most obvious one for me is the inbound sales rep owning that piece of the process, early stage sales process, where you have really tight alignment between leads to converted opportunities, and incentives in that piece when you're specializing can be really effective.
And my other question is, do you see a difference when you're talking about younger organizations versus older organizations? And there's some very large young organizations, like Starbucks is a younger organization. Apple's a younger organization versus IBM and Microsoft, right?
Yeah.
So do you see a real difference in how marketing and sales are working together
Sure.
in younger versus older?
Yeah, the biggest difference is, if you've been born as a company in the last 10 years, you've been conditioned to market in a very different way, right? So the executive leadership all the way down is focused on, digital engagement, they're focused on pipeline marketing, they're focused on revenue. And they've just been conditioned that way. That's how they've grown up. They've grown up in the environment. Whereas the change that you need to drive in organizations that have been around longer, both in terms of how they're structured, cultural biases, all those things, the change takes longer. So you see them naturally lagging And you see that every day when you look out there in the market in terms of companies that are disruptive. They're disruptive because they have new technology, they have a better value proposition, and they're disruptive, candidly, because they're better aligned to how their customers want to actually consume what they do from a marketing and sales messaging perspective.
Great perspective. One last question.
It's more, I don't know, what are we doing on timing?
Actually, just to give you a time check, I just want to ask one last question, but obviously Jason will be here and we'll kind of continue to network. If you want some drinks or more food, please stay. We have the space till 9, but did you want to?
It was
suggest
more,
something?
I mean, I've known, truth be told, I've known Jason for a really long time, and what I'd love to do is seeing the evolution for the majority of people who've been here in a sales role and understand the complexity of the new, buyer dynamic. What they're doing is, it's mind-blowingly interesting, and as a sales rep, you'll light up because you as a sales rep you're ultimately the end user. So I just wanted you, Jason, to kind of give a little plug on what you guys are doing and the technology, because again, as an enterprise salesperson, anybody that's selling complex deals, what they have at their disposal is really changing the game.
Yeah, if you'd said that without saying I've known this guy for 10 years, that would have been helpful, but I appreciate the plug.
But truth be told, I haven't known you for 10 years.
No.
Maybe 3 or 4 months, but likewise, obviously getting to know you and your expertise is why I had you speak tonight. But also part of it was I thought there was some really interesting things that MarketBridge is doing from that technology perspective. So feel free. I mean, this is a forum.
Yeah, and it won't spend much time. You can always check it out on our website if you're interested. But at the core of what we're trying to do is help salespeople be more productive and to sell more. And a big part of that for us is better data, better integration with systems that give you better intelligence on your customer, and then more prescription in what you're doing as a seller to free up your time to spend the time on the valuable things, right? So instead of doing 20 minutes of research before a call, you're doing 3, and you're spending the 17 minutes on strategy and figuring out the next steps, and just kind of making that process easier. So we do that, with a product we call Stringer. We do that with a set of data and analytics that we deliver, that we port from internal systems like CRM and marketing automation, ERP, to land everything on the desktop of the seller to make their job much easier. So we've got some products for marketers as well, but that's the big one for sales. So happy to talk to anyone about it in much more detail if you're interested.
Sure. And one last thing before we break. Is there any sort of book or video or blog or something that's been really inspiring lately that you wouldn't mind sharing? It could be on sales, could be on anything, but.
Yeah, so Mark Roberge, who was at one of your events recently up in New York, who was the CSO at HubSpot, just put out a book called The Sales Acceleration Formula. So if anyone's in sort of sales leadership or interested in being in sales leadership or interested in figuring out how to scale a sales organization, it's a very good one. Predictable Revenue would fall into that. It's a little bit older, Aaron Ross, who kind of started Salesforce, their inside sales function. Mike Weinberg writes a really good book called
New Sales Management Simplified.
Yeah, New Sales Management Simplified, which is all about how you manage sales effectively and sort of focusing on the things that are important as opposed to all the things you get pulled into as a sales manager, which is good. I'm reading this book right now called Traction. I don't know if anyone's heard of it or read it, but it's all about kind of hacking marketing and all the things that you need to be thinking about as you try to scale a marketing organization. And it's a great combination of kind of the old school with the new school and how you make the mix right and how you really focus on the things that are working as opposed to continually trying everything and seeing what sticks to a wall. So that one's a good one. I think those are probably the 3 that I've got going right now. So
Funny, I think we mentioned Mike Weinberg's book last night.
Oh, really? Yeah,
But we're talking about sales culture, and that one of his big things is companies that have the anti-sales culture.
Right.
And that he's walking to all those companies, so it's a really interesting read. But,
Yeah.
But I really appreciate your time, and just thank you for sharing. And Jason will obviously be here. We have more food and drink in the back, but thank you, everyone. We'll make an announcement on the next event. That'll be coming momentarily, but thank you again for supporting the group. Thank you to Hanover Research for being a great host and a sponsor, as well as Market Bridge for just being a great company and having some cool stuff.
Cool.
So thank you.
very
Let's
much.
round of applause.
Thanks, everyone.